Our $850 million commitment also includes support for vaccine development through the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations and the WHO's Solidarity Trial that helps hospitals share information on treatments. The more we cooperate, the more likely that we find a cure and find it quickly. And that's something we all want to see. Depuis le début de la crise, on se concentre sur...
Since the beginning of the crisis, we've been concentrating on what happens here in Canada. We've been working hard to ensure the safety of Canadians and to prepare to restart our economy while protecting our frontline workers. But COVID-19 is a worldwide problem, and everyone has to do their share. The contribution of Canada to the global fight against COVID-19 will be $850 million. This includes investments in Canadian research as well as worldwide research. It also includes the implementation of the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and work done by the WHO, which encourages the sharing of information among hospitals. By working together, we're maximizing our chances of finding a cure quickly. And this is what all countries and all citizens of the world want.
COVID-19 is an unprecedented challenge, but it's not the first time that Canadians have been called to do their part. Over the past generations, Canadians have time and time again stepped up in defense of our shared future. This week marks the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Netherlands and a Victory in Europe Day. From the fall of 1944 to the spring of 45, thousands of Canadians pushed back the occupying forces, road by road, town by town. They fought, and many died, to defend the values that we hold dear: peace and democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. And today, 75 years later, we remember their courage and their sacrifice. Earlier this morning, I spoke with Mark Rutte, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. We talked about the close, lasting bonds of friendship that exist between our two countries. We talked about how we collaborated together in years past, standing for our values, fighting side by side, and how we're doing that again today in this global crisis, in friendship and in solidarity. So today, I ask all Canadians to join me and our friends and allies in the Netherlands at 2 p.m. Eastern Time to observe 2 minutes of silence in honor of our veterans. As we pause, let's reflect on how each of us can live up to their example. Maybe you'll do your part by staying home to protect our healthcare workers. Maybe you'll bring groceries to an elderly neighbor or make a donation to a food bank, or simply make the effort of sending a postcard to a veteran to thank them for their service. With your actions, you are contributing to your community and demonstrating that Canadians, time and time again, will continue to step up. I know the weather's getting nicer, but we still need to be extremely careful. And not just for our seniors, but for everyone around us. So don't go out unless you absolutely have to. And if you do, keep 2 meters apart from each other. Cette semaine marque le 75e anniversaire de
This week marks the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Netherlands and Victory Day in Europe. In 1944 and 1945, thousands of Canadians pushed back occupying forces, one village at a time. They fought, and many gave their lives to defend the values that we hold dear. Today, 75 years later, we remember their courage and their sacrifice. At 2 p.m. Eastern Time, I invite all Canadians to join me to observe 2 minutes of silence in the honor of our veterans. During these 2 minutes, let's think of how we can all live up to their example. Maybe you'll do your share by staying at home to protect our healthcare workers, by making a donation to a food bank, or by writing a postcard to a veteran to thank them for their service. Each and every one of us can help in our community. But regardless of what you do, continue to stay at home and to keep 2-meter distance among yourselves. Thank you.
Questions? Just a reminder, one question, one follow-up. Operator?
Thank you. Merci. First question, Kate Belangaro, Bloomberg, line open.
Hello, Prime Minister. We've heard from Canadian Airlines that the government is studying what is happening elsewhere to help the sector, and they're getting a lot of aid in other countries, and they are direct competitors of the Canadian industry. So I'm wondering, what exactly is your government looking at to help the airline sector beyond the wage subsidy, and why is it taking so long to roll this out?
We have in Canada a very strong airline sector, and we need to continue to have a strong airline sector once this is all done. So, of course, we're looking very carefully at how to support industries like that are so important to Canada and to Canadians. But one of the key things that we were able to do right off the bat, which helped massively in the airline sector and elsewhere, was move forward on the CERB and the wage subsidy. Ensuring that Canadians can continue to keep their jobs even as they stay home, that they continue to have that link to their employers is going to allow our economy to come back stronger and the damage done by this COVID-19 pandemic to be minimized. We will have more to say about sectoral supports in the future, but for now, the support that we've given to workers right across the country is making a very real difference.
We know that we have a strong and competitive airline industry before this pandemic, and we will after the pandemic as well. But during this crisis, it's important to support industries and especially workers. This is why we put forth the CERB and also the wage subsidy program to make sure that people were able to stay at home, but to have money to pay for groceries and to pay for the rent. Also, to make sure that when the economy will restart, they will still have jobs to go back to, and they will have a link to their job and their employer. We will have more announcements to make on how we're going to specifically aid different industries that have been hard hit by this pandemic, such as the airline industry. But right now, the CERB and the wage subsidy are helping Canadians throughout the country.
Quick question regarding the Bank of Canada nomination. You've been committed to more equality and diversity across government positions. Why did your government decide to follow the same model by nominating another English-speaking man to the role instead of a francophone or a woman?
We were fortunate in this country to have many extraordinary people qualified to head up the Bank of Canada, and we made the determination on who would be the best to see us through this difficult time and 7 years into the future as well. And I know that Tiff Macklin will do just that. Nous avions un processus à suivre. On a eu plusieurs.
We went through a process. We had many candidates who were interested in the job, and we chose the best person for this job to help us during this crisis period and during the years to come. Tiff Macklin will certainly be this person.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Laura Osman, the Canadian Press. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. I wanted to ask you about the EU pledge conference this morning. The money pledged by Canada is sort of money that's already been announced. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation estimate it'll take about $20 billion in the long term to roll out a vaccine worldwide. So why is it that Canada is not bringing more money to the table, and has Canada been asked to pledge more in the coming days and weeks?
The pledging conference this morning was a beginning. It was a recognition that many countries are already stepping up in developing research and science towards a global vaccine. Canada has made significant investments, as you've highlighted, in our scientists and researchers who are world-class and who are contributing to finding solutions not just for Canadians, but for the entire world. It is really important that the world comes together to collaborate, because even once we find a vaccine, whether it's in Canada or elsewhere around the world, we will share that vaccine in its formula. But production of that vaccine will be extremely important right around the world as well. It cannot just be the wealthiest countries producing that vaccine for their citizens. We need to ensure that there are systems in place so that the billions of people around the world who are vulnerable can get these vaccines as well. That's why this takes a global effort, and that's why Canada is so pleased to be able to contribute through what we're doing here at home and investments overseas as well. And there will be more to come as the world grapples with this pandemic.
We know that we have some of the best scientists in Canada that are doing extraordinary research to find a vaccine. There are worldwide efforts that are necessary as well. We're funding research at historic levels here in Canada to help the world effort, but we also recognize that we will need a lot of cooperation and coordination on a worldwide level. That is why Canada was very proud to participate and to contribute $850 million with investments, especially in Canada, but also internationally, to demonstrate that we are part of this approach to find a solution. We need it for everyone, all of humanity.
On the emergency financial benefit, will the current benefit programs be adjusted to account for the slow and gradual return of people to work and the fact that they may return to earning too much income to qualify for benefits, but not enough to sort of get back to where they were and make ends meet and pay the bills?
Laura, I really look forward to facing that challenge of how we start to scale back the benefits and help people get back to work. We're not there yet. We're very much still trying to make sure that people are getting the support they need, even as the economy is starting to gradually reopen. Our focus is on keeping people safe and ensuring that they have the ability to stay home and pay for groceries and pay their rents and support each other. So yes, obviously a lot of thought is going into the various steps that are going to be needed as we get people out of their homes and back to work. But for now, we're still very much focused on how we help people through this.
Thank you. Next question, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Raymond Filion. TVA, à vous.
Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. To continue, there is a wage subsidy program that for 12 weeks goes until June the 6th. Are you going to extend this program? I think that there is a lot. We will have to have discussions over the next steps. We know that eventually people will go back to work. In what sectors, in what regions, and how are we going to manage the shift between the support that we're sending out to people and a return to work? These are extremely important questions. For the time being, we're still concentrated on the need to help people, to assist them while the economy is closed. All these questions around reopening and gradual return to work will be part of many discussions with provinces, with sectors, and it will be part of our discussions as a government. You also said in an interview last night that in hindsight, your government should have done some things differently in its management of this pandemic. Could you tell us exactly what? Well, during an unprecedented crisis, we do our best. Could we have done some things differently? Yes, of course. And I know that when everything will be over, many people will make recommendations. We're going to ask for an audit. We're going to ask how we can be better prepared for next time, if there is to be a next time. But right now, my priority is to see what do I have to do today and tomorrow to help Canadians, to protect people, to make sure that we get through this as best possible. I don't spend a lot of time looking back. I try to look at what we have to do today and in the weeks to come.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Hélène Buzetti, Le Devoir. À vous.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Hello, Mr. Trudeau. I'd like to come back to your announcement on Friday on assault weapons. We were wondering if there would be a grandfather clause or not for those who already have these weapons in their possession, what is your preference? Do you think there should be a grandfathering clause or not? And if so, what explanation could you provide to have these weapons in the possession of citizens? That's a good question. First of all, last week's announcement was that we would ban the sale, the purchase, and the use of military-style assault weapons. And this is an important step to gun control in the country. We were very pleased to announce this. This had been promised during the election, and we delivered. But there are next steps, as you're indicating, in order to see how things are going to work. How will the buyback program be set up? What will be the measures in place? Will we have a grandfathering clause or not? And so we're going to look at the different parties. We're going to see what works as a system, what's reasonable, and what will protect citizens the most. These discussions will be held at the House of Commons with different groups that are concerned by the situation, and we will find adequate answers for Canada. Yes, but should I understand, you talked about opposition parties, so can I understand you're in a minority position, so you're not sure to obtain the support of at least one party to make buyback compulsory, or is it a question of cost? Are you afraid that this would be too expensive for the government because we're already in a deficit position? I think there are many factors that need to be examined. I don't think it's only a cost issue. I think that Canadian safety is the absolute priority, and we're going to do what is necessary. We are in a minority parliament. We need to work with other parties, and I know that the Bloc Québécois and the NDP have a position that's aligned with ours. They want a greater gun control, and I believe that we'll be able to work together to find the way forward.
On we brought forward important measures on banning the sale, the purchase, and the use of military-style assault weapons in this country. This is a significant step towards more gun control in this country, and a very important one. But there are many other steps to take, and there are many details to be worked out on exactly how the buyback program will work, whether and what sort of grandfathering there might be. These are things that we will be working on as we move forward towards legislation. We will have to work with other parties in the House, not just because we want to establish a strong consensus, but because in a minority parliament it is necessary to get the support of other parties. And I know that both the Bloc Québécois and the NDP are very strong, aligned with us in wanting more and better gun control. And we're going to work together, and I'm sure we're going to be able to get the right balance for Canadians to keep people safe in their communities as we move forward.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Christian Noël de Radio-Canada.
Christian Noël, Radio-Canada. Normally the budget is tabled in March. Now we're in May. Do you have the intention of tabling a budget or at least an economic update between now and June? What's your thinking about this? First of all, we are investing in helping Canadians with billions of dollars because of the pandemic. At each and every step, during press conferences, with what the ministers are saying, and the ministers' press conference each noon, we are transparent. We are being transparent in what we foresee for the weeks to come and what we're working on. We will continue to be open and transparent. A budget, in normal times, is a forecast. It's a forecast of the measures that will be presented in the year to come. Right now, we are in a period of uncertainty, extraordinary uncertainty as to what might happen next month or in 3 months. We'll continue to be open and transparent with the measures taken and with our forecasts for the economy. we'll find ways to share this with you, but we have not yet been able to determine what the best way is of looking at a budget or an economic update, or maybe another way of sharing information with Canadians as to what we foresee for the months to come.
We have been extremely transparent with Canadians about the investments we're making in this unprecedented times, whether it's the billions of dollars in support for Canadian families across the country or measures that we're moving forward with to support small businesses. We have been announcing just about every single day, me here or ministers, what we're doing and sharing it with Canadians. A budget typically is an expression of what people can expect in the coming year, both in terms of how the economy is going to unfold, what sort of measures are going to be brought in. And in normal times, it's usually pretty accurate. Right now, we're in a situation where there is a tremendous degree of uncertainty as to what the economy could look like 6 months from now, what the economy could look like 3 months from now, what's going to happen in the coming weeks. So while we are continuing to be open and transparent, the reflection on at what point we might be able to present a budget or even just an economic update is ongoing. We will continue to keep everyone apprised of what we're doing and what we see coming, and we'll continue to look for ways to share with Canadians.
Ce que j'en comprends, c'est que dans votre esprit, on est encore en mode réactif et non pas en mode planification.
We're still reacting and we're not in planning mode, and so at least an economic update, is this out of the question? No, I'm not. Nothing is off the table. I think that we need to be able to instill confidence in Canadians. They need to feel that we have a plan to respond to this challenge. Ever since the beginning, we've been reacting to the situation that we're in. It's an unprecedented situation. We are looking at reopening the economy, how we can position Canada to get out of this pandemic, how we're going to help workers, small businesses, how we can make sure that people are able to keep a link with their employer even if they're staying at home. All these are elements. It's not a reaction, but also it's a preparation. It's a preparation for economic recovery. But this work is ongoing. We will always see how we can ensure that we can provide information to Canadians.
I just want to go back to the question about potential financial aid for the airline sector. Air Canada posted a first quarter $1 billion loss, or in excess of $1 billion. I just want you to clarify in your answer. It seemed that are bailouts for affected industries that have been especially hard hit during this pandemic off the table? Is there any possibility outside of the programs you've already announced?
We moved forward very quickly on supports for workers through the Canada Emergency Response Benefit and through the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, which is being taken up by companies large and small across the country, including airlines who see this as a real way of making sure that when life starts to return to normal, they are able to get their employees back to work very quickly. This was the emergency priority that we had as a government to ensure that Canadians from coast to coast to coast would be okay to be able to stay at home, to be able to buy their groceries and support their families and pay their rents and do the things that would allow us to stay safe. But we recognize that companies large and small in various sectors across this country are particularly hard hit by COVID-19. I think of the airline industry, I think of the tourism sector, I think of the energy sector, and other significant sectors that will require more support on that. We will be looking at sectoral supports. We will be making announcements on that in the coming days or week. It is something we have to get right, but we will be looking at measures to ensure that some of our most important sectors for the Canadian economy continue to stay strong through this pandemic and mostly beyond it.
There's a great deal of concern from employees at the Cargill meat processing plant in High River, Alberta, that are going back to work now after the plant was shut down because of the death and multiple cases there for COVID-19. You said last week that top priority is ensuring worker safety. These workers don't feel safe. What more can the federal government do in terms of inspecting food processing plants to ensure the utmost safety during this time?
We're working with provinces across the country to ensure that the supply chain for agriculture continues and that worker safety is upheld. Though that is a provincial area of responsibility, but the federal government has a role to play as well, particularly around ensuring that there are adequate safeguards and PPEs in place. One will remember that the CFIB, Canadian Food Inspectors, are designed to inspect the food for safety, are ensuring that the way meat is handled, the way vegetables are processed, is not putting Canadian safety at risk. The responsibility for the protection of the workers in that place is not the primary, or hasn't been the primary responsibility of the CFIB. That is much more for provincial labour codes. But we will, of course, be there to support the provinces in its work to ensure both the continued flow of supply chains for our food, but also the protection of workers who could be vulnerable right across the country. Okay. Le Canada
Canada is concerned with the health and safety of citizens. The federal government has the responsibility to make sure that food that is processed is safe for human consumption. This is the work that is done by the federal agency responsible for this. It's not a direct responsibility of the federal agency to take care of the health of workers. This is under a provincial jurisdiction, but of course, the federal government will be there to help, to participate as much as possible to protect workers in our food sector. We will be there to work hand in hand with provinces and to protect our supply chains and to ensure the safety of the workers.
Prime Minister, a question about the Policing the Pandemic report, which shows $5.8 million in fines have been levied against Canadians for COVID-19 enforcement. How do you reconcile the support the federal government is providing to Canadians with the fact that other levels of government are handing out substantial amounts of fines?
I think it's extremely important that Canadians continue to behave as we have largely in social distancing, in staying home, in keeping ourselves, our loved ones, our families, our extended families, our seniors, our healthcare workers, and our essential workers safe from rapid spread of COVID-19. The federal supports that we've given to workers, to families, to students, to people right across the country have been so that people can stay home, so that they can engage in social distancing, so they do prevent further spread of COVID-19. And we are seeing over the past weeks that the curve is flattening and we are on a positive trajectory. We are not out of the woods, however, and it requires us to continue to remain attentive and vigilant in following the instructions set out by our public health officials. And that's why different jurisdictions have different, more specific rules suitable for their own jurisdictions, and that is also why they have taken it upon themselves as a responsibility to ensure that those rules be followed for the protection of all Canadians.
On sending your kids back to school, what specific protections would you want to see in place so that kids and teachers are safe?
I think obviously that's an area of provincial jurisdiction that I won't weigh in as Prime Minister, but as a parent I can certainly say that looking at what sort of social distancing measures will be in place, what are the kids going to do at recess, what are the kids going to do at lunch, how many kids are going to be in a classroom, how my kids are going to be kept safe, are things that all parents are thinking about, and all parents will want to see that the school system, the province, the teachers, legislatures are grappling with before we move forward in the next steps. And I know that there are an awful lot of people at all those different levels working on that right now.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News. How do you feel about countries that aren't contributing to this global pledge but have in the past, and how the means to do so again?
I think this is a moment for people to come together and recognize that we all have ways of contributing to solving this problem. I think if it is a global pandemic, and what happens outside our borders, no matter how well we handle what's going on inside our borders, will have an impact on us directly with potential further spread of COVID-19 or indirectly with disrupted supply chains and a weakened global economy upon which we all depend. I think we need to look at doing our part. Certainly Canada has a long and storied tradition of stepping up as we mark the 75th anniversary of Canadians liberating the Netherlands tomorrow. We know that Canadians have always stepped up and will continue to step up because we recognize that our role within the world does matter. And I would encourage all countries to see that the only way we're going to get through this is if we get through this together.
On another matter, in Canada, women have been hit harder than men by COVID-19. And when you look at many sectors that employ women, such as the service industry, they are suffering right now. So I'm wondering, how can your government ensure women aren't set back by this virus?
I think a number of people have talked about the fact that this is a economic crisis that has hit our most vulnerable and most marginalized peoples the most. And women have been extremely hard hit in the service sector, in the home care sector, as well as a number of marginal and more challenged communities, whether it be new Canadians or whether it be young people. We need to make sure, and that's why as a government we've moved forward on protecting vulnerable people with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, with extra help for charitable organizations and networks that are there to work for each other. One of the things that has been a real preoccupation for this government is when we tell people to stay home, to stay safe, and their home isn't safe, what do? The impact of domestic violence at a time of tremendous stress and anxiety for all of us in society that can exacerbate situations of domestic violence is something that we are deeply preoccupied with as a country and as a government. That's why we've made investments in shelters and in networks to support women fleeing domestic violence, and we will continue to recognize that this pandemic isn't hitting everyone equally, that the most vulnerable, as they so often are, more vulnerable, and that is why we have to do everything we can to support the people who need our help, including and especially women through this.
We recognize that this type of crisis and pandemic doesn't affect everyone the same way. Women are extremely vulnerable, oftentimes because of the jobs that were the first to disappear. Also, we know that there are many tensions and stress in households due to COVID-19, and this can lead to increased levels of violence. What does someone do if they're told to stay at home, to be safe, but their home is not a safe place? The reality of domestic violence is extremely hard-hitting these days, and this is why our government is investing in shelters, in networks to help women and children who are affected by gender-based violence or domestic violence. This is a priority for us and for all Canadians, and we will do everything we can do. Thank you.
That is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau speaking outside Rideau Cottage this morning. The last question was about how this crisis is hitting women far worse than it's hitting men, not only in terms of healthcare workers, but also as the Prime Minister talked about domestic violence happening in homes. We've seen numbers in terms of domestic violence calls to shelters up since this pandemic began. Let's talk about some of the other things that he spoke about. We're going to bring in our Abigail Beeman and David Aiken, who are both standing by in Ottawa. Abigail, I'm going to start with you and the $850 pledge that was made this morning in this EU-hosted telethon conference of sorts as it looks for more money. This is not new money, is it, Abigail? $850 million.
No, it's absolutely not new money. It's all different pockets of money that had previously been announced by the Trudeau government. The EU in this telethon, as you mentioned, is looking to raise in a one-day pledge 7.5 billion euros, about 11 plus billion Canadian dollars. So some questions there as to whether this commitment from Canada really counts towards that one-day goal when it had been previously committed. The Prime Minister was asked about that. He admitted it was sort of the beginnings, first step, that lots of work needs to be done here. But he was a co-signatory of the letter that came out from the EU about this, and he was a part of the news conference that the EU held this morning. He made some comments along with other world leaders that were streamed across the world.
Yes, and notably absent from this was the Americans, of course, Donald Trump pulling funding from the WHO right now. Abigail, a couple other things to talk to you about, and one is about school. And you just heard the Prime Minister a few questions ago. He talked about school reopening, and he was asked that yesterday, too, during his media conference for the second time, whether he would send his own children to school in Quebec. What did he say about it today?
You know, I found his answer to be interesting on that front because he made it very clear off the top. He said, I'm not answering this as a prime minister. I'm answering this as a father, because he has been asked a number of times, you know, you're a father. What do you think about sending your kids back to school? And he's dodged it a few times, which was surprising. So today he actually gave a considerable list of things that as a father he would think about before sending his children back to school. How is physical distancing, sharing? How are those things going to work? How can you be sure that children will be kept safe in this environment? And I think those are questions that every single parent has when they're making that decision in their own family. So he was more candid today, I would say, in his answer, but again, making it clear that this is a provincial decision. He's not speaking as a prime minister, but as someone who's a father of 3 kids.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Abigail, thank you. And we know that schools opening outside of Montreal next week and then in Montreal the week after, if all goes according to the plan that the Quebec government has laid out. I want to bring in David Aiken now. And David, let's start with talking about the federal budget. Today, this morning, we heard Andrew Scheer, the leader of the Conservatives, say that he wants to see more transparency, more time in person in the House of Commons to poke holes in some of the ideas the Liberal government has. How would this budget even work if it was to happen? What did the Prime Minister say about that, David?
Well, the Prime Minister, quite frankly, does not know how a federal budget would work given the current pandemic, given the way the House of Commons right now is proceeding. So there were sort of 2 parts to that answer that the PM had. First of all, noting that because it is so uncertain, because there is billions of dollars going out the door, we really can't make any forecasts about how the economy is going to respond, you know, even in the next 2 months, let alone the next 12 months. That forecasting, which is a key part of any federal budget process, is pretty difficult. Then there's the second part, and that's the process by which a budget is normally introduced in the House of Commons, is considered by members of the House of Commons, and ultimately is voted on by members of the House of Commons. And of course, don't forget, that vote would be a confidence vote. It is a minority parliament after all, and if the government failed to win a confidence vote, then the government, of course, could end up, well, we could be into an election or who knows what. So what did Andrew Scheer, the opposition leader, say before the PM started today? Scheer is now pressing for a more normal return to parliamentary life. He doesn't want these, one afternoon sessions where everybody's forced to agree on a bill lickety-split. It was appropriate for some of that emergency legislation. And Scheer, I think, he's signaling that his patience is sort of at an end for that process, and that would certainly include a budget. But still, again, the Prime Minister says, don't know when a budget's coming out, can't even forecast when we might get what's called a fiscal update, which would at least let us know, where we're at. And don't forget, in terms of reporting, we're really now only able to report on April, which was the first full month of this pandemic really hitting and really affecting the Canadian economy, affecting the Canadian Treasury. So it's still early days in terms of how this pandemic is going to affect federal financing and the Canadian economy.
One number that we did get this morning is from the airline industry. Air Canada losing $1 billion in the first quarter this year. This airline industry says it's suffering. And in fact, while we were on air, I got an email from the National Airline Council representing all the airlines saying that it's looking for urgent support. And right now, 94%, that's the drop in bookings. And there's a $10 billion fleet just sitting there. He didn't commit to any help specifically for the airline industry. But what did he say, David?
Right. So all he said to that when he was asked about help for the airlines was that they are considering additional help beyond, say, the wage subsidy program or some of the new lines of credit offered by the BDC and the EDC. He said that the government was considering, quote, sectoral support. And then he listed 3 sectors that were particularly hard hit: airlines, tourism, and the energy sector. And we do know that, 3 weeks ago, the finance minister said energy sector help was I think hours, he said, hours if not days away. Well, that was 3 weeks ago. So we'll see. But he's getting asked for that help. Don't forget, airlines are a federally regulated business in Canada, and that means that they are shielded to a degree from some kinds of competition. Foreign airlines cannot essentially provide point-to-point traffic within Canada. So, for example, Toronto to Vancouver. But for international airlines who are getting some help from their governments can compete with, for instance, Air Canada doing Toronto to Tokyo. We'll see. I mean, the big pressure for airlines right now is at the stock market because Warren Buffett, the wizard in Omaha, dumped all his airline stocks today. Berkshire Hathaway doesn't want any part of the airline story, and so airline stocks are getting hammered right now, and that's a big problem for them too.
The way we traveled is certainly going to change no matter what. David Akin, thanks so much. Now, just to recap for you, the Prime Minister was asked about claims the emergency response benefit is keeping some Canadians from re-entering the workforce. Scheer said that this morning. The Prime Minister says we're not there yet and the economy isn't fully functional. Trudeau was also asked about when we will have a federal budget and economic update. And again, he said we're still in a period of tremendous uncertainty, and he promised transparency, but no timeline. Thanks for joining us. We have much more on globalnews.ca. We now return you to your regularly scheduled programming.
Okay, good morning. Bonjour et merci de vous être joints à nous aujourd'hui.
Good morning and thank you for coming today.
It is Mental Health Week. I know the past weeks have been difficult for everyone. Let's remember to take care of ourselves and of each other. Let's remember that it's okay to ask for help and to feel sad and frustrated and alone. We are all in this together. And while we do need to practice physical distancing, we don't have to suffer alone. There is help out there for all of us. À tous les Canadiens, je sais que c'est un temps très difficile.
I know that these are difficult times for all Canadians. This is Mental Health Week. So let's remember to take care of ourselves. We can all ask for help, and it's okay to feel sad. We are all going to get through this together. No one should suffer alone.
So today we are going to hear from Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, the Deputy Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Howard New, et le Président du Conseil du Trésor, Jean-Yves Duclos. Dr. Tam, please.
Good afternoon. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. I will start with the latest numbers on COVID-19 in Canada. There are now 59,844 confirmed cases, including 3,766 deaths. To date, labs across Canada have tested over 919,000 people for COVID-19, with just over 6.5% of these testing positive. We are at the start of a new week as we all inch closer to social and economic reopening. most of us will be feeling the full gamut of emotions, from excited anticipation to nervous apprehension. All of these feelings are warranted, given the uncertainties that lay ahead. Still, there are continued signs that our efforts have slowed the growth of COVID-19 overall in Canada. In some places, the epidemic has been brought under good control, and the time is right for a cautious reopening. Other areas of the country may not be quite there yet, but will follow, guided by the careful assessment of public health authorities. During these many weeks, public health tools have helped us to tackle COVID-19 spread, buying us time to protect and bolster our healthcare capacity, ramp up research, and increase capacity for testing and tracing. Going forward, adapting these tools will be a big part of managing COVID-19 for the months ahead. No matter where we live, living with COVID-19 is something we all need to reconcile with. This means physical distancing, hand hygiene, and cough etiquette must continue everywhere. And although we'll be getting out of our homes more and more, it will be vitally important that at the slightest sign of symptoms, we stay home to save lives. Working while sick can no longer be a thing. As we move through the weeks ahead, let's not forget we are all in this together, and we'll work our way through it with good science, strong evidence, careful steps, and a shared goal to succeed despite the hardships. Together, we can do hard things. Today is May the 4th, so may the force be with us. Que la force soit avec nous. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tam. Dr. New, please.
Merci. Bon après-midi.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As usual, I'll start with the latest numbers on COVID-19 in Canada. There are now 59,844 confirmed cases, including 3,766 deaths. To date, labs across Canada have tested over 919 people for COVID-19, with over 6.5% of these testing positive. We're at the start of a new week, and as we all inch closer to social and economic reopening, most of us will be feeling the full gamut of emotions, from excited anticipation to nervous apprehension. All of these feelings are warranted, given the uncertainties that lie ahead. Still, there are continued signs that our efforts have slowed the growth of COVID-19 overall in Canada. In some places, the epidemic has been brought under good control, and the time is right for a cautious reopening. Other areas of the country may not be quite there yet, but will follow, guided by careful assessment of public health authorities. During these many weeks, public health tools have helped us to tackle COVID-19 spread, buying us time to protect and bolster our healthcare capacity, ramp up research, and increase capacity for testing and tracing. Going forward, adapting these tools will be a big part of managing COVID-19 for the months ahead. No matter where we are living with COVID-19 is something we will all need to reconcile. This means physical distancing, hand hygiene, and cough etiquette must continue everywhere. And although we'll be getting out of our homes more and more, it will be vitally important that at the slightest sign of symptoms, we stay home to save lives. Working while sick can no longer be a thing. As we move through the weeks ahead, let's not forget we are all in this together, and we will work our way through it with good science, strong evidence, careful steps, and a shared goal to succeed, despite the hardships. Together we can do hard things. May the 4th be with us.
Merci, Dr. Nou. Et maintenant, je
Thank you, Dr. Nou. We'll now go to Jean-Yves Duclos, please. Well, thank you, Christia, and good afternoon, everyone. As you know, we're facing a global pandemic that requires global action when it comes to action and health. And that's why Prime Minister Trudeau made an important announcement this morning saying that Canada would continue to play an important role internationally, despite the issues that we are facing on the national front. There are some $800 million for testing, tracing, and vaccination in order to prepare for the production and distribution of products, treatments, vaccines that will protect us and help cure us from COVID-19.
Health crisis at the international level, and that's why we also reacted, as we saw this morning with the Prime Minister, nationally and internationally. And with the health crisis has also come an economic crisis, and I would like briefly to summarize a few of the emergency response statistics that we have seen over the last few days. First, when it comes to helping workers through the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, a total of 7.3 million Canadians have received the CERB for a total of 10.6 million applications. Second, when it comes to providing help for wage subsidies, emergency wage subsidies, as of the 3rd of May, 96,000 applications have been made on the part of businesses, and a total of 1.7 million workers are being helped through the emergency wage subsidies. And finally, to help support our small businesses in this very difficult time, through the Canada Emergency Business Account, 518,000 businesses have applied and have received a positive response following their applications for the emergency business account, helping them go through the crisis in order that when the crisis is over, we can still rely on the great level of leadership and ability of our small businesses to grow again the economy. Thank you, Christia.
Okay. Merci, Jean-Yves. Et on est maintenant prêt à répondre.
Thank you, Jean-Yves. We're now ready to take your questions.
Our Minister of Health, Patty Hajdu, is here to answer questions as well. Carl, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. As usual, we'll start on the phone with 3 questions before we turn to the room. 1 question, 1 follow-up. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. If you have a question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad. We have a question from Laura Osman from the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. The line is now open.
Good morning, ministers. For anyone who's able to answer, the Chinese embassy says the million masks from China that the Public Health Agency said couldn't be distributed last week were held up by a contractual dispute, and it's been resolved. Are you able to elaborate at all on what happened and what the status of those masks is now?
Hi, we'll have to get details back to you. I'm sorry, we don't have that technical information right now.
Laura, follow-up?
Deputy Prime Minister Freeland, I was wondering if I could ask you a more political question. I'm wondering to what extent you're concerned about the rhetoric coming from your policy rivals, the Conservatives, and their refusal to express their confidence in the nation's top doctors.
Well, first of all, let me be clear about one thing, which is that to ever impugn the loyalty to Canada of a Canadian based on their racial or ethnic background, or whether they were born in this country or immigrated here, is completely unacceptable. A Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. And I am so confident that the overwhelming majority of Canadians understand and believe that. When it comes to the public health officers in Ottawa and across the country, I think Canada has been very well served by the dedication and the expertise and the collaboration of our public health officers across the country. And I think political leaders across the country have been really uniform in spending a lot of time with our public health officers, really working hard to understand their advice and to listen to their advice. And I think that has served Canada and Canadians very well.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question est de Lynn Adib de la Presse canadienne.
The next question is from Lynn Adib, Canadian Press. Good morning, Mr. Duclos. I'd like to go back over the numbers you just shared with us. They're very interesting. You talked about 7.3 million Canadians out of the 10.6 applications for the CERB. Were there rejections? You also talked about 1.7 million workers who received the wage subsidy. Are those people who Well, in fact, what I'm trying to do is see whether people are being transferred from one program to the other. Could you please give some additional details on those numbers? Well, going to the first question with respect to the emergency benefit, 7.3 million Canadians applied, made one or two applications, because the total number of applications is 10.6. And the applications that came in were approved. So the difference between the two numbers is that some people have received more than one payment. Now, as of April 11th, people could put in a new application in addition to the one that they had made initially. With respect to the wage subsidy, yes, 96,000 companies applied for salaries paid between March 15th and April 11th, so that covers 1.7 million workers. So 1.7 million workers who have no need to apply for the CERB. Follow-up question. So these aren't people who were transferred from one to the other. I had another question, a more technical one, with respect to the student emergency benefit. Now, we know that school calendars are different. In Quebec, they were supposed to be finishing in May. It'll be the end of May. So will CEGEP students, for example, receive the benefit for June, July, August? What about high school students who are heading off to university? Will they be eligible for July and August because their school year ends at the end of June? Answer. Well, to clarify, to add some clarity to the first question that you put, it all depends on the worker's circumstances. And one situation doesn't apply to all. So some may have received a benefit under the CERB, then realized that the company they're working for would be paying out emergency wages. So then they would be reimbursing or have already reimbursed the amount they received because they are now receiving the wage subsidy. Now, with respect to the benefit for students, what's important is the time when they complete or finish their studies and when they would have normally started looking for a job. So for CEGEP, for example, in Quebec, it's different in Quebec because outside Quebec there are no CEGEPs. But once they finish their year and they would be looking for a job, that is when they would become eligible for the emergency benefit for students. With respect to secondary or high school students who have finished their year and plan to go on to post-secondary studies, now outside of Quebec, it's normally at the end of June that they would become eligible. And for university students, it is at the start of May. Thank you, Minister. We'll go to the operator for the next question.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Lauren Gardner from Politico. Please go ahead. The line is now open.
Thanks. This question is for Dr. Tam. You've talked a lot about the need for Canada to ramp up testing to 60,000 a day. And I'm wondering when you think that Canada can get to that point and what, until then, what needs to be done to get there?
I think there's increased testing, as you've seen, day over day. So I think the common goal is to increase that. 60,000 is just the capacity target for the provinces and territories based on the existing public health laboratory capacity. But we're investigating any other avenue for increasing lab testing, including point of care, and also the role of serologic testing when they do come on board. I think it's not a magic number. That is a capacity number. You do have to test the right people at the right place at the right time according to the epidemiology of the provinces. So they have to adapt their testing strategy based on what they're seeing. It's very different from a jurisdiction that have no cases and no community transmission. But there's increased testing, of course, being ramped up, for example, in Quebec, particularly in communities where there's been more reporting of cases. So I know that chief medical officers and provincial public health authorities are very seized with the need to use testing to inform the next stage. So I think we would expect to provide as much support as we can from the federal level to enable that to happen. So, but every day, as I think Ms. Hadji will attest, we're constantly monitoring every bit of the supply chain, and every day there may be something that we need to tackle together. So that's just a sort of daily reality of the supply issue. But we're also tackling supplies from a domestic manufacturing ramp up as well. So I think a lot of those trajectories means that we can absolutely be increasing testing in Canada.
Follow-up?
Yeah, my follow-up for the Deputy Prime Minister. I'm wondering kind of what is the next stage of Canada's engagement with the U.S. on COVID-19 response, just given looking at the large caseload in the U.S. and the differences between the states on what some are doing in terms of promoting physical distancing versus moving to reopen economies, and the impact that could have on Canada as we move further along and get further away from the immediate public health response. Do you have any thoughts about what might need to change in terms of Canada's collaboration or interactions with the U.S. on COVID?
So let me just start by commenting a little bit on the premise of the question, the idea that there would be a next stage. The reality is that the Canadian relationship with the United States is so close, and there is a connection and an interdependence on so many levels that this is a relationship that we are working on literally every day, even every hour, and not only at the federal level. The premiers are very engaged, particularly in working with the governors of their border states. Mayors are involved, business peoples are involved. So it's something that is happening every single day, every single hour, and that is exactly as it ought to be. And it's a relationship when it comes to coronavirus that has a lot of different aspects to it. There is obviously the border relationship, and I think that that is working out today very well for both countries. We have told Canadians, we've asked Canadians to stay at home, and it's been very neighborly to offer that same approach when it comes to our American neighbors. At the same time, essential travel is still happening, and that is happening really effectively. And that is so important for things like being sure that we have groceries in our grocery stores. We also have been working really effectively when it comes to the medical equipment supply chain. So this is an ongoing relationship. It is something that is a priority for any Canadian government, very much including this one, and it's going to develop as the situation with the coronavirus and on many other issues develops.
Merci, Madame la Vice-Première Ministre. We'll now turn to the room, starting with Julie Van Dusen from CBC.
Julie Van Dusen, CBC. I think it's for Theresa Tam or for Patty Hajdu. So President Trump says he believes that COVID-19 is the result of a horrible mistake in China, that he and Mike Pompeo have evidence that it originated in a Wuhan lab. What's the government's view? Where did it come from? How did it start?
Well, I'll start and I'll turn to Dr. Tam, as she's been actively involved in monitoring the illness since it first made its appearance back in December. There will be time, obviously, and a lot of interest and importance to understand how this virus became prevalent in the human species. And I think those questions are being asked, rightfully so. Certainly, the research and scientists community is all over it and trying to understand where the virus originated from and how it's evolved and mutated since it's been present in humans. But for me, as the Minister of Health, and certainly as the Government of Canada, although those questions are important because they will help us prevent future outbreaks and understand what we can learn from this particular virus. What's even more important right now is to stay focused on Canadians' health and helping Canadians get through the outbreak that we're in now, how we flatten the curve together, and how we protect and strengthen the health and social fabric of our communities. And so that's the work that I remain focused on. Dr. Tam, did you have anything further to add about your work?
Well, I don't think we've seen any specific information to say that this is a laboratory accident or release, but at the same time, we don't know the exact origins of this virus. Of course, the hypothesis is it comes from a reservoir like bats. It's very likely to have involved another animal somewhere in between the zoonotic or animal-to-human transmission. So that question hasn't actually been answered fully as yet. So I think there's a lot of work, including genetic analysis and more collection of animal and other data. There is international constructs with OIE, WHO, and others just to try and get to the bottom of the sort of where that zoonotic transmission occurs. So I think the natural history of the evolution of this virus will may be found in the upcoming months, but sometimes you actually might not find that until many months later. The SARS virus was the same thing. You had to sort of trace back, do a lot of sort of analysis in order to come up with a hypothesis. So I'm not sure that this is something that will be, immediately obvious, but work is continuing on that front.
Okay, so I didn't hear the words wet market, so it seems that it's not 100% clear where it came from. And on a similar kind of vein, it wasn't so long ago, and I guess the question is either for Theresa Tam or Patty Hajdu. It wasn't so long ago that the government said temperature taking was not reliable. There was no reason to take people's temperatures when they came into the country. That was maybe a couple of months ago. Now, Air Canada, you won't be able to get on a plane unless you have your temperature taken, you're wearing a mask. So I guess I'm wondering, do you regret being so definitive, or is it just really hard to get your footing when it comes to this virus?
Well, it's a novel virus that undergoes a lot of evolution in terms of knowledge, but the more you actually understand this virus, the more you begin to know that temperature taking is not effective at all. In terms of people coming across, even if you're infected, we know that the likelihood of picking up someone who's symptomatic is sort of relatively inefficient. And so temperature screening alone is not going to add to that. And if we had a significant number of asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic people, that also even reduces even the effectiveness even more. I think the most important aspect of our current response is to ensure that incoming travelers undergo the mandatory 14-day quarantine, so that within those 14 days, if you had a temperature, if you had any other symptoms, you can be safely managed and that you reduce spread to the rest of the population. So that is really the fundamental aspect of our border health response right now.
Thank you, Doctor. Mr. Chase.
Hi, Stephen Chase, Globe and Mail. My question is for the Deputy Prime Minister. In 2017, your government famously said that you would welcome people from around the world, refugees who were fleeing persecution and other dangers. As we reported today, 46 Hong Kong residents who took part, many of whom took part in the massive demonstrations that began there last year, have now submitted claims for asylum in Canada. They're citing harassment by police and police brutality, and they're citing fears of unjust prosecution. Canada has a large and lengthy history of Cantonese immigration to Canada, and I wanted to ask you, is there a place for these protesters in Canada?
Well, thank you for your question, Steve. And on specific asylum claims, that's an issue that needs to be adjudicated very carefully and very thoughtfully, certainly not via press conference. But let me say about the Hong Kong Canadians that you're quite right, that Canada has benefited hugely from the immigration of people from Hong Kong to Canada. They contribute tremendously to our society. And I think all of us are very, very glad that so many people from Hong Kong have chosen to make their home and their lives here.
Just a follow-up question. I think one of the issues that's going to be debated more and more over the next few months and years, and I don't think these 46 are certainly the end of this, is does Hong Kong's political and legal system give rise to a possibility of a serious possibility of persecution? What are your thoughts on that?
Look, when it comes to Hong Kong, Canada's position is clear and very long-standing. We have supported consistently the one country, two systems policy. I made a number of statements about that as foreign minister, and Francois-Philippe Champagne, our foreign minister, has continued to be clear about that. And because of the large number of Canadians who live in Hong Kong, Canada does have a particular interest in the situation there.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Kevin?
Kevin Gallagher with CTV News. This is directed at the Deputy Prime Minister, but feel free to answer because it does have some other implications for the Health Minister, perhaps Dr. Tam. There was two more cell phone towers in Quebec that were burnt down. So there's one on Friday. There's concern that it links back to a conspiracy theory that the coronavirus is spread through 5G networks. The question, though, is how has misinformation that we have seen throughout this pandemic hindered or presented a challenge to get out effective public health information to people about this outbreak?
Well, I'll start, and then my colleagues may want to chip in as well. The incident to which you refer is, of course, regrettable, and there have been similar incidents in other countries, too. Of course, misinformation is especially dangerous at a time like this, when all of us are concerned, quite rightly, and when all of us are being asked to radically change our behaviors and radically change the way our daily lives operate. So it's a time of both heightened anxiety and tremendous change. And so disinformation can have a particularly pernicious effect. We as a government are working very hard to push back against that disinformation. I think that's why all of us are here right now. And I would like to really also recognize the very important role the provinces and public health officials in the provinces are playing in that effort. And I do also want to say, I think Canadians have been great. Canadians are really smart. Canadians are really well informed. And while inevitably there are going to be individual moments where people fall prey to disinformation, by and large, I think as a country, people are making really smart decisions, and those smart decisions, those smart, well-informed decisions are saving lives. I don't know, Patty, Teresa, do you want to add anything?
Quickly say that I think it's quite normal during a period of such uncertainty and anxiety to look for answers. I think people want to know, I keep saying this, the question I hear in many different guises is, when will all this be over? You know, how did this happen and when will all this be over? And I think they're questions that, you know, are top of mind for Canadians as they're stuck at home, as their livelihoods have changed, as they're so many mothers that I know parenting and trying to work at the same time, fathers too. The situation has changed tremendously for people, and that uncertainty drives, I think, a quest for knowledge or a quest for understanding. How did we get here and how do we get out? And that's why we've tried so diligently, not just through press conferences, but things like making sure we have the Canada COVID-19 app, that we disseminate information through the website, that we provide transparent information, that when we don't know, we say we don't know. And when we have new information, we present it quickly to the public. There is a whole field of communications called risk communications. Certainly, experts know that it's really important that you are available, for example, that you tell the truth, and that when you don't know the answer, you say you don't know the answer. And so we certainly try to continue to follow those principles so that Canadians can have confidence in our government, but also have confidence in what we keep saying, which is that we will get through this together as a country.
Just to follow up, and with provinces opening up businesses or loosening restrictions, there are concerns that as people start to get back to what would be more of a regular routine, that some of the new habits that have been picked up, physical distancing, for example, may become eroded as time goes on. So what are the main points that Canadians who are living in provinces that are starting to loosen restrictions need to keep in mind to keep themselves safe and to ensure the spread of the virus is as low as possible?
Well, I think the first thing Canadians need to remember is it's not over. It is a cautious reopening in certain provinces and certain sectors, but that the new normal will have to include new ways of living, new ways of working that will protect us in this unique and difficult time. If we, as we know, as we suspect, I would say, a large portion of Canadians haven't been exposed to COVID-19. Which means that we don't have widespread immunity across the country. And we've done a really good job as Canadians holding the line, flattening the curve, reducing that transmission rate. But the continuation of that depends on us being extremely careful in with these new permissions from public health, that we can proceed to go back to work in certain settings, that we can proceed to go back to school in certain settings, but that we will have to follow the advice and guidance of public health nonetheless. And I think for governments, what that means is we'll need to repeat and provide that information in a variety of different ways. You'll probably see a lot more Government of Canada and provincial and territorial advertising about the importance to continue to wash your hands and to stay 2 meters apart and to cover your coughs appropriately and your cough into your sleeve and to most essentially not go to work or go to school if you're sick. And I think those messages you hear Dr. Tam repeat every day, they often are not, I think, what people want to hear. They want the magic solution, but the magic solution really is all of us continuing these practices that we've adopted and become somewhat used to over the last several months. Dr. Tam, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, it is going to be difficult, but I think keep on sustaining our messages about continuing the new things that you've learned, I think, in the last few months about personal hygienic practices, definitely staying home when you're sick, and practicing physical distancing. But I think the public does have to be supported to do so as well. So for businesses, we know that the province and territories are asking for very specific plans in terms of how do you restart certain, say, non-essential businesses safely so that the customers are also nudged into doing the right thing, like, how you pace the number of people in your store or how you set things up so that people reduce the risk of transmission. Hand hygiene stations, in different places, as you've seen, I think will continue and needs to continue. But I think a lot of the creativity and the innovation that has actually occurred in the last several months, I think really needs to be capitalized. Some of the teleworking, telemedicine, and being able to access services in different ways will, I hope, continue. You need to build on the momentum of those innovations in order to help people adjust to this living with the virus. So you'll hear us in a very boring way repeating those messages again and again. Employers, of course, need to be able to support, and governments in helping people to stay home when they're sick. That is not an easy thing to do. That's probably the most difficult habit to sever. And but people have to be able to do it with the support of their workplace or their schools or the environment that they are working on. And then, of course, we know about the issues that characterize this epidemic, which consists of supporting those most vulnerable and in high-risk settings, and those must also continue as well. But I think Canadians have so far been great, and that we, with more reinforcement, they'll be able to continue to adjust and adapt. And I think it's just adapting and adjusting in a very slow way and cautious way is how public health is envisaging things. The other thing is the balance of physical and mental health and all the other dimensions as well, so that there are some habits that we may have had which was good for us and we diminish them. I certainly know I've exercised less, but sort of reigniting some of those preventive measures, I think, is very important.
Merci, docteur. On va maintenant retourner au téléphone pour 3 questions. Opérateur.
Merci, thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. We'll go to the phone for 3 questions. The next question is from Émilie Bergeron. You have the floor. Question. Good afternoon. With respect to the production of a vaccine, a collection initiative was launched today, and there will be a number of steps involved. Some will have access to it before others. Even though we want everyone to have access to it, there will have to be a priority order. How will we determine who has first access to the vaccine? Answer, Dr. New. Well, I think that before I answer your question about access, I think it's important to underscore the fact that with global cooperation, because research is being done everywhere and here in Canada, we will continue with research and in a spirit of sharing data with a view to developing a vaccine. Now, there are a number of technical aspects. People are saying that it will take between 12 and 18 months to do so. For scientists, I think, it's always based on the concept that the vaccine will be available for everyone worldwide. With respect to details on production, how it will be distributed, etc., those are issues that I can't answer now personally. But with good cooperation and collaboration across the world, we will come up with solutions to ensure that everyone who needs a vaccine, once we've developed a vaccine, will have access to it. Thank you. Follow-up question?
Yes, I will go in English because maybe Minister Aidu can answer about this. Once a vaccine will be found by a country or the other, or different countries together, there will be countries who will have means to produce a certain quantity of vaccines faster than others. So I know that we are not there yet, but how are we planning this vaccine?
You're right. In some ways, we're not there yet, but in other ways, we're preparing to be there for when a vaccine is created. And how we do that is, as Dr. New pointed out, we work together with countries so that the research is pooled and there's a collective, I suppose, shared ownership, if you will, of the findings of the research and the discovery of potential vaccine candidates. But also, we're funding a number of Canadian companies who are doing research on vaccine, like Asylum, which was part of the conversation or the announcement today, looking at other as well as candidates for people that will not only be able to find the vaccine, but then produce the vaccine with their partners across the country. And all of that work is very important. It is almost like a race, but a race where you want everyone to be able to cross the finish line at once. And so we know here in Canada that as long as COVID is raging out of control in another country, Canadians will not be safe. And that's why the spirit of collaboration that Dr. New spoke about is so important, because yes, of course, every country wants to find a vaccine and vaccinate their citizens. But there will always be risk to every population if we don't consider the world health and the global health. And that's why I think it's so exciting to be part of an international effort, as well as the domestic support for companies and researchers that are working so hard here in Canada.
Thank you, Minister. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Jessica Murphy from BBC. Please go ahead.
Yes, hi, thank you. I'm just wondering what you can tell me on a federal level, what's being done in terms of emergency preparedness. Obviously, we're already in flood season, as we saw with Fort Mac, but also, we're coming up on wildfire hurricane season. So what's being done amid this pandemic at the federal level for that preparedness?
That's a great question, Jessica, and it is something we are very, very focused on. Every spring, the Minister of Public Safety and Emergencies puts together a plan working with the Minister of Defense to respond to potential floods and forest fires. This year was no exception. And in fact, this year, those preparations have had the added element of a very deep appreciation that coronavirus would add a level of complexity to the response. For example, when it comes to being really thoughtful about places where people who may need to leave a place where there is flooding or a place where there is a forest fire, having places where they can go. Obviously, this period of physical distancing means that we have to be particularly thoughtful about making provision for those kinds of things. But we are very aware that flood season and then forest fire season is upon us, and have been working very hard in collaboration with the provinces to be ready.
Follow up?
Yes, thank you. I do have a quick follow-up. I know in the U.S., for example, FEMA is looking at the complexities, for example, of getting people out of hospitals during this time and getting people out of long-term care facilities and that kind of thing. I wonder if there's anything specific that's being looked at in Canada in a similar way, any of the challenges or any things being looked at that level.
Sure, of course. I mean, the issue of what you do with housing people who may need to leave areas of flooding or forest fires is a really, really important one. And so, of course, is the issue of taking care of and moving people who are particularly vulnerable. So for sure, that's part of the planning.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. The next question is from Marie Vastel, Le Devoir. La parole est à vous.
Oui, bonjour. Ma question est pour Madame Freeland.
Marie Vastel, Le Devoir. My question is for Ms. Freeland. I'd like to go back to the ban on assault weapons that the government announced on Friday. For months now, the government has talked about those weapons not being used for hunting. So why is there an exemption for an amnesty period for 2 years for Indigenous communities or people who are hunting? If you could comment on that. Answer. Thank you for the question. I think that our announcement on Friday was an historic moment. With respect to the exemption for Indigenous communities, it is an issue of constitutional rights for Indigenous peoples. I think that all Canadians understand that we must pay particular attention to that, including their right to subsistence hunting. And that is the reason why the exception was included. Thank you.
Marion Suivi?
Follow-up question. Another question for you, Ms. Freeland. I'd like to know or to have an update on the negotiations with the provinces when it comes to bonuses for essential workers. For a month now, you've been discussing the issue with the provinces. There was a call with the provincial leaders at the end of last week. Did you reach an agreement? And if yes, can you tell us when the pay bonus will be paid by Ottawa to the provinces for essential workers? Answer. Another good question. Thank you. We have an agreement in principle between the federal government and the provinces. At the federal level, we understand that each province has specific measures. Some provinces have already provided a bonus to essential workers. We're continuing to work out the details, but that doesn't prevent the provinces from going forward. And the federal government is here to help the provinces. We feel that it is very important for Canadians, for people doing such important work. Many of the people doing these jobs are not well paid, and therefore it's very important to provide the additional support. Question. So there isn't an agreement then, if I understand what you're saying? Answer. I wouldn't say that. There is an agreement in principle, but for each province, it's an issue of working out the details. Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister.
Hello, Dr. Tam. So what are your thoughts on provinces? Some are doing really great, some are still struggling with the virus. So what are your thoughts about the provinces reopening, the ones that are having a harder time while the virus is still spreading around?
So I think with chief medical officers, we've established certain criteria, but they have to be applied within the context of the local epidemiology and what's going on. It's quite a complex decision, as you can imagine, balancing, of course, the fact that you need to have these cases under control. Your ICU has got to be at good capacity, but also that you have testing and contact tracing capacity in place. So it's quite complicated, and every area is going to be different. Even within a single province, you may have different situations. So that's the level of flexibility that is required, because what we don't want is to continually sort of close everything while, you know, in that particular location, it may be safe to do so. So I think that is actually important, because there are actual potential negative consequences, of course, whether it be mental health or other issues. And I think my colleagues are very seized with that aspect as well, because if you don't return certain activities to a sort of living with COVID normal, then the consequences are could be quite severe. Some of the key areas of initial reopening that they are considering, of course, is the non-urgent medical care. People getting outside, because transmission outdoors is less of a risk, but you try to maintain that 2-meter distance. So these are the kind of decisions that they're going through. But again, what I know for sure is everybody's going to be cautious about this. So slowly, carefully, see what happens, and then do the next step, I think, is a characteristic of all of the plans.
Okay, but what if once we reopen up and people become impatient with the COVID measures because now they're free, and they want to just return to normal, and they throw those measures out the window? What happens then?
as I say, the province is going to be very careful. They have quite powerful local public health laws and guidance and what they expect businesses, schools, workplaces to do. The moment they think something isn't going right, they're going to be readjusting. You're dialing up or down some of these measures. And so depending on how your population is adjusting, they're going to have to flexibly look at, well, do we need to tighten things up again? Mainly looking at the cases and the epidemiology for sure. So, and I do know that every community and its makeup might be quite different. So a very big city like Toronto might be quite different from a very small jurisdiction. But I think at the local level, they'll be watching very carefully. They can reinstate certain measures for sure if the things are not going well.
Thank you, Doctor. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci.